Hi, this is TheHande's. So last year, I finished the 60-second He-Man reviews on the New Adventures of He-Man. And honestly, after that, I felt a little sad. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had a lot of fun with this series. I kind of fell in love with it. But I kind of knew that I was never going to have a reason to really talk about New Adventures after this point. However, then I realized something, that whenever I finish watching a He-Man or She-Ra show, I usually do one of two things. I either make a podcast about it that nobody listens to, or a top and bottom 10 episodes list video. And I decided I might as well do that for the New Adventures of He-Man, just to give me one last excuse to talk about this and use a whole bunch of the screenshots that I have saved up from the 60-second reviews. And yes, because I originally cooked up the 60 seconds review format based on the one used by the real Jims, I'm going to continue to honor him by using still images, which I still had to take quite a few more because I didn't save any from the Attack on Honor. Now, of course, in the description you can find a link where I've listed all of the ratings I gave for all of the episodes. However, I want to stress something here that I didn't actually emphasize the ratings so much, and this will become more evident when I do my top 10. Because today, we are starting with the bottom 10, just for a change of pace. Because yes, I usually tend to do the top 10s first, but I decided there's really no good reason not to do the bottom 10 first. Now rest assured, every single episode that I gave Have a Grayskull for is going to get featured on this list. Except the Taking of Leviton, which I totally forgot even existed. But as I rewatched all of the episodes for this list, I kind of came to the realization that the order wasn't quite as clear as I thought. And there were a lot of episodes I feel I gave really low grades to originally, which would have maybe deserved better ones. So like I said, when we start the list, don't pay so much attention to which episodes had Have a Grayskull or one Grayskull as a rating, but rather what I have to say about them. And if you disagree, all the episodes are on YouTube, so you can go and watch them for yourselves. I mean, if you want to watch what I think are the 10 worst episodes of this show for some reason. Now let's get on with the list. At number 10, The He-Man Mutant. In my review for The He-Man Mutant, I called it the show's best worst episode. So, of course, it naturally deserves to get the number 10 spot on the bottom 10. Well, I'm not sure if that is necessarily fair, because one of the reasons I didn't want to give the He-Man Mutant a rating was because while it is unquestionably a bad episode, it's honestly really entertaining. And I guess that is as good a reason as any to exclude it from any higher position on this bottom 10. It starts with He-Man trying to figure out what the mutant's plan is, and rather than use a safe and less risky way to find out, He-Man decides to go completely against character, act impulsively, and turn himself into a mutant, which almost very nearly wins the day for the bad guys. Yes, the premise is bad, but the New Adventures of He-Man has a lot of episodes with either questionable or just flat out of place premises, so this is certainly not enough for it to get on the bottom 10. Nope, for that, it has to have also super bad direction. And don't get me wrong, there are actually a lot of New Adventures episodes that do suffer from bad episode direction. But most of the time, what tends to happen with those types of episodes is that they tend to have a serious storyline where the tension is completely undercut by the terrible direction. The problem with the He-Man Mutant is that its initial premise is terrible. So when you add terrible direction to it, the whole episode becomes a jumbled mess. And as a result, very, very hilarious. It is incredibly entertaining to me that He-Man just very nearly helps the bad guys win the day, but all of the derpy moments where the characters are trying to be very shocked and serious also just do not work. All the episodes on this list are bad, but this one is also amusing. At number 9, The Gift. The Gift is the first episode in the Mutant Occupation story arc, which is probably the best story arc from this entire series. I mean, unless you kind of want to count the first 7 episodes, but those are a very loosely defined story arc, aka the Greenhead Skelly episodes. However, considering how good the Mutant Occupation story arc actually is, it's kind of annoying to have to recognize that the only reason it even gets started is because of one character's absolute butt-numbing stupidity. And that person is Zebrian. Zebrian completely ignores Drissy's warnings about how she can't psychically communicate with the Zeps because he's so hell-bent on making peace with the mutants, even though this very same thing was a central plot point in the episode The Festival of Lights. An episode with considerably lower stakes, but again, where Drissy's power actually revealed the mutants' plan ahead of time. Also, The Gift is an episode that makes my head hurt because I don't quite understand what's going on half the time. I do not know how the Zeps are able to overpopulate Primus. And if they aren't actually breeding, because, they're robots, that would mean that Flog would be shipping these by the boatload onto Primus. Which, considering that they're still in an uneasy state of truce in the plot of this episode, makes even less sense. And honestly, the fact that Cebrian keeps playing a central role past this episode is something that I kind of find completely inexcusable. Also, partly because I really hate Cebrian. As much as I complain about the Primus scientist, I honestly think I actually find Cebrian far more annoying and grating. Now, that all considered, The Gift has definitely by far the easiest way to get itself into a number 9 position. And that's the production quality, which is goddamn fucking amazing. This is by far the best animated episode you're going to see on this bottom 10. Some might even consider me nitpicking the plot so much kind of pointless because the episode really does have pretty good direction for the most part, but if you start to look closer, you will notice other kind of stupid things about it. One thing I really hate is that the tension at the end is completely ruined by the voice director putting stupid voice effects and echoes on Gary Chalk's voice, which were not necessary. The ending would have stood well on its own without all of these bells and whistles being thrown in. It's like they felt leaving the episode on a cliffhanger was somehow underwhelming, which is completely ridiculous. At number 8, Attack on Honor. Attack on Honor is an episode that I seriously had to consider really hard if I actually wanted to include in the bottom 10, because it was the very first episode I gave half a grace call to. In hindsight, I do feel that was a bit harsh. So that's one reason it only gets up to number 8 on the bottom 10. But it is still a bad episode for a number of reasons. First of all is the erratic animation quality. Second of all is the fact that it focuses on Werbin, who is a terrible character, but there's actually something else about Werbin that makes this episode even more annoying to me. Thirdly is the fact that the episode plot makes really no sense. Or at least a lot of the things that happen around it make no sense. Like He-Man almost getting defeated by Hoof and Karate. But then the hippo dude comes to save him, who's shown to be physically pretty much as powerful as He-Man, which really does make me question why did Hydran and Flipshot even bother going back to the past to get him in the first place. But no, the thing I hate about Attack on Honor is the fact that Werbin, while he does get mind-controlled by Skeletor because he's another peace-loving diplomat type, eventually shows a lot of resilience when the mutants try to catch him, as he tries to protect the key to the Primus shield from them. The end of the episode really seems to imply like Werbin learned the error of his ways. But then, in almost every other episode, Werbin is still a complete asshole. Yes, Werbin went through actual character development through this entire episode, and then the writers just kind of chose to forget about it, and every single time Werbin appears after this point, he has been reduced to a punchline. The guy who always has to throw shade in the other character's direction, or have stingy comments about their competence or whatever. And I really hate this, because in this episode, Werbin actually comes off somewhat likable. But you want to know what was introduced in this episode that made multiple returns? Gibble's fucking goo. Yes. This episode was the introduction of Werbin learning from his mistakes, and the Primus scientist coming up with an adhesive, and only one of those two things was kept for future episodes. At number 7, The Dreadator. The Dreadator, you might remember, is one of 2 episodes that was inspired by the Star Trek episode The Arena, and this one was the worst one. Basically, Skeletor and the mutants sick a lizard gladiator thing on He-Man. The two of them fight things out, and then at the end, He-Man spares his life. And yes, that last part was supposed to be a pivotal plot point, which is one of the key things that this episode tries to do to ape the arena. The problem here is that this is He-Man, and He-Man never kills the bad guys anyway. So him going up against the Dreadator and then seemingly sparing his life is a completely pointless plot premise. Now, terrible one-off villains are going to be a running theme on this bottom 10, and the Dreadator is certainly not the worst that the show has to offer, and you could even argue he's technically not even a standalone villain, because A, he's not really evil, and B, Skeletor is technically tricking him into fighting He-Man. And once again, this episode has decent animation quality, but I honestly just do not find it very entertaining. The main issue is that we don't really know what's so special about the Dreadator. We are shown him fighting this fly guy at the start of the episode, and that is supposed to somehow convince us that he could actually be a match for He-Man. Dreadator falls into a long list of New Adventures episodes where the stakes don't really feel genuine because we have no real context for what's going on. But it's not a wholeheartedly terrible episode either, so that's why only number 7. At number 6, The Children's Planet. Oh boy, did I say something about stupid original villains? Enter Maxis, a former henchman of Skeletor's, who is so unmemorable as a standalone villain that he feels the need to name-drop Skeletor in the first 3 scenes that he appears in. Now this episode does have terrible animation quality. I also didn't really like the whole Omega Gas aspect of the episode. In fact, the only thing I really liked about the episode was the snowy setting and a few recognizable voice actors in the cast. That's about it. It's a derpy, jerky mess of an episode, where, again, they try to be very serious, but I think because of the poor direction, the episode really never rises to the occasion. And Tuscadar and Spinwit barely get to be in the episode at all. I gotta really wonder, why did they bother dragging these guys along anyway? Oh yes, and there's a couple of weird aspects of this episode, like Sebrian using magic to stop Spinwit from pressing the button that would blow up the planet. And the Primus scientist just randomly launching a missile that saves the day at the end. Yeah, this is an episode where nobody seemed to know what the hell was going on. And that's why it goes to number 6. At number 5, The Tornadoes of Zil. In this episode, He-Man and Spinwit go check out a distress signal from the planet of Zil, which is covered by giant tornadoes, discover a civilization living underneath there, and Spinwit, after saving one little girl, is suddenly declared their legendary hero, which goes to Spinwit's head, causes the Zillions to turn off their tornado machines, inviting an attack from the mutants. Oh yeah, and this is the episode where Skeletor lost his helmet. Now, there are these important transition episodes in the New Adventures of He-Man, where the show clearly moves from one part of to the other. Sword and Staff moves us from the Greenhead Skelly cycle to the series proper. The Gift moves us to the Mutant Occupation story arc. The Balance of Power moves us to the Mike Gleanon story arc, where this episode takes place in the middle of all things. And for some reason, we're supposed to care about Skeletor losing his helmet, which we don't. Now, if you looked at this episode completely without any context for the New Adventures, you would probably think that it's just kind of a shitty episode of a cartoon show. The animation quality isn't awful, but it's not great, and it's about a hero who has fame go to his head, gets humiliated, and then does good at the end. Now all that is fine, but the problem is the part of the series where this happens. Now when Spinwit was introduced originally, he was just kind of a wimpier version of Flipshot. Kind of uncharismatic, completely unmemorable. But then, in the middle of the series, Spinwit started using his powers, and was proven to be not just competent, but actually an invaluable member of the Galactic Guardians. Spinwit is at most a C-grade support character, yet he actually had character development all through the series, which again the writers completely decided to ignore in this episode, where the fame goes to his head. To be fair, he at least feels bad about it at the end, but I had seriously started to like this character so much at this point that this episode really felt like a slap in the face to me. And again, the only thing about this episode that is even mildly entertaining for me is all the silly stuff. Now this episode is definitely way more offensive to me than anyone else, so while I definitely wanted to put it in the bottom 5, in the end, I didn't have the heart to put it any higher than number 5. At number 4, Collision Course. Yes, you might be a bit surprised by this. I was too, because I originally talked about this being potentially the second worst episode of the series. What's even more surprising is that I actually seriously considered putting this in spot number 1. But after rewatching it, I honestly came to the conclusion that it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was. It is still pretty damn bad. The Collision Course's plot premise has Skeletor reverse engineering an anti-gravity beam from the plans of the Primus scientists, with a plot of pushing Primus out of its orbit into space and destroying it. Now again, much like the Tornadoes of Zil, if you went into this episode with no context for the New Adventures of He-Man, you wouldn't even blink an eye at this particular premise. The problem with it is that it goes completely against the premise of the show. So, in case you didn't know, Flog and the Mutants are the main villains of the series, not Skeletor. Flog and the Mutants have a campaign going against Primus, not Skeletor. Flog and the Mutants' plan is to conquer, subjugate, and then live on Primus. Skeletor's only interest is killing He-Man, and he's joined up with the Mutants because that's the only way he can on this show. However, this episode not only ignores that Flog is the leader of the Mutants, because Skeletor clearly takes the lead, it completely ignores the fact that Flog wants to, rule Primus. But Skeletor wants to destroy Primus. And worst of all, Flog isn't even trying to stop him. Even more bafflingly, he's actually cheering him on. The writer completely missing the characterizations, or getting them backwards in this case, is completely inexcusable. You add to this all the really stupid animation errors and a bunch of cheap gags with gravity, because that is supposed to be the sort of running thread through this episode. And this episode not only becomes really annoying to watch, but also just very tedious because you are not sold on the stakes whatsoever. One of my favorite little bits that I didn't talk about but noticed in the middle of this episode is how both Skeletor and Sabrian make phone calls to the main characters in the middle of action scenes, with no other purpose but to remind them of what they're actually doing there. This, in my view, kind of also displays how the director didn't have any clue what was going on, and just blindly followed the script. But in hindsight, as annoying as the episode is, as stupid as it is, there are still one or two kind of funny parts about it that I did enjoy. It's not a lot, but because of that, I didn't feel comfortable putting it in the top 3. At number 3, The New Wizard in Town. An episode which focuses on a one-off villain called Rambling. Rambling has been invited to Primus by Sabrian along with 2 other wizards for a meeting. What are they doing at this meeting? I don't know. Why did Sabrian call the wizards there? Well, for a meeting. What the meeting is about, we never find out. Why does Sabrian even care to invite these guys over? I have no clue. Why did Sabrian call Rambling to Primus when he's very, very clearly evil? I do not know. Why does Skeletor know who Rambling is? I do not know. If they are to imply that Rambling has been alive since the time of the original Filmation show, that would have made a little bit of sense. But he's not a character from the Filmation show. He's just a shitty original villain, introduced for one episode, who has no attachment to any of the characters, and we're just supposed to assume he's the greatest threat to Primus. Oh yeah, and the way he gets defeated is that He-Man refuses to fight him at the end. This scene confounded me probably even worse than the first time I saw it. What's worse is that they clearly intended Rambling to be a recurring villain. The ending very clearly points in this direction. But they never got to do that because there was never a second season to The New Adventures of He-Man. Simply put, The New Wizard in Town does not feel like it even belongs in The New Adventures of He-Man. So putting it in the bottom 5 was really a no-brainer. And the thing that really kind of saves it, again, is just the animation quality, which is ridiculously high. But in this case, I would not even call this episode particularly entertaining. And rewatching it really did not make me like it anymore. At number 2, The Games. Now let's get one thing straight. The Games is the worst animated episode of The New Adventures of He-Man. And The New Adventures of He-Man, while having erratic animation quality, for most of the time had above average animation. So The Games being this goddamn awful, with so many mistakes, so many blatant elements missing, and a fucking smudge just off the center of the screen through the whole episode, makes this completely unbearable. What's worse is the fact that it's supposed to be the climax episode of the series ending story arc. Now, yes, technically the final episode, I guess, is the final climax of the series, but this is the episode that the first 3 episodes in the story arc have been building up to. I still do not understand how jet lag allowed this episode to get released. My guess is that the production company knew there was not going to be a second season, and decided that rather than actually put any effort into this episode, they wanted to save some of the budget and put all of that into producing the final episode to make sure that one would be at least somewhat decent. And the plan worked. The final episode actually is very decent. The Games is awful. It is an eyesore, and the fact that the game's story arc is really just super stupid. I mean, seriously, did we need a reason to pit the heroes and villains against each other on the fucking New Adventures of He-Man? The premise also sucks. But I would say this episode at least is so shit-tastically bad, you can kind of make fun of it, but it is also really painful to see how low the series fell right towards the end of it. Granted, the couple of episodes after this were actually watchable, but that still doesn't save this episode. And finally, at number 1, The Plague on Primus. This episode has Skeletor creating a fear gas which only affects Priman men. So, you would think this would mean that Drizzy and Mora would be the heroes of the episode, rallying the women of Primus against the mutants and saving the day. Except He-Man's also not affected by the fear gas for some goddamn reason. Maybe it's the power of Grayskull, but they never explicitly state it. The reason this episode is really bad is that it sets up Drizzy and Mara as being potentially the heroes of the episode, but then pulls the rug from under the audience and just has He-Man be the hero. I mean, I get it, his name is on the title of the show, but seriously, He-Man couldn't be even a little bit affected by the gas and then had to fight through the fear or something? I mean, that would have actually been pretty cool, but that would be giving this episode way too much credit. Because the other things that are wrong with it, the episode direction, everything moves along at a very awkward pace. Lots of plot movements just happen for no reason. Skeletor just disappears after He-Man defeats him. And then there's a lot of animation errors. And really, the more I thought about it, I honestly feel the Plague on Primus really is deserving of being called the worst episode of the New Adventures of He-Man. I think even the episode writers felt bad for ruining the whole setup, which is the only reason why we get that random bit of Mara and Trissy shooting at the mutant ships as they're escaping. Way to go, girls. You really showed them, huh? And that was the bottom 10 New Adventures of He-Man episodes. Stay tuned for the top 10, and until next time, I have the power, so can you.